Thank you, Ms. Baker. I appreciate that. All right, I'm going to start with questions for Mr. McIntosh. On April 25th, for the first time since the January 28 mid-air collision, the Army resumed flying in the National Capital Region. Less than a week later, Air Traffic Control had to command 2 commercial aircraft on final approach to abort their landing at DCA due to an Army Black Hawk on an apparent training mission at the Pentagon having wandered far too close to the commercial aircraft flight path. Shortly thereafter, and just 10 days after having resumed limited flight in the National Capital Region, the Army Aviation Brigade suspended operations in the D.C. area. Mr. McIntosh, I had been told that prior to the Army Aviation Brigade's decision to suspend operations on May 5th, the FAA was preparing to suspend the letter of agreement between the Army and the FAA that gives the Army the ability to operate the D.C. airspace without having to first ask for FAA clearance for each flight. Was the FAA prepared to suspend the letter of agreement? And if so, what was concerning enough to justify such a decision?
Thank you for the question, Senator Cruz. Like yourself, we were extremely troubled by the incident that occurred, especially in light of DCA and the events that led up to the accident. To be quite honest with you, we were ready to deploy any option available that we could use or had that we felt was necessary to bring safety measures and better behaviors from the DoD in this instance. To answer your question, we were ready to do any option available to include what you just spoke to, which was removing the ability to fly.
So just to be clear, does that mean the FAA did actually draft an order suspending the Army's ability to fly in the D.C. area?
I'm not 100% aware if we drafted an order, sir, but we did have discussions if that was an option that we wanted to pursue. I do know that the DoD came back and suspended operations on their own based on that event. So we're still working with DoD to improve that process.
Well, I commend your vigilance in protecting the flying public, particularly in and around DCA, given the horrific accident that occurred earlier this year. Is it true that the hotline, the direct line between the Pentagon Air Traffic Control and the DCA tower, has been inoperable since March of 2022?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Who maintains that hotline?
I believe the DoD maintains that hotline, but I think the next question would be, why were we not aware of it and insist upon it being fixed? And
I didn't have that written down, but it's a good one.
Well, so we take safety responsibilities extremely seriously in the FAA, and those were the questions we were asking. And we were not aware, but we became aware after that event. And now that we became aware of that event, we're insisting upon that line to be fixed before we resume any operations out of the Pentagon.
Do you have a timeline for when that line will be operational?
To be honest with you, Senator, I would expect the DoD to expedite that timeline so they can begin their operations.
And while Army flights were ongoing, if the hotline was not operational, how did controllers communicate?
That's a great question, Senator. We still have landline abilities. We can make phone calls from the helipad to the operation where the supervisor or even the controller in charge can answer. So we're aware of the activity. And if there was a departure clearance needed, we'd be able to relay it via that mechanism.
Is it also true that the air traffic control positions for local traffic and helicopters were combined early, just as they were on the day of the mid-air collision?
Yes, sir, it was.
Let me say the developments at DCA and its airspace are extremely concerning. And together with Senators Cantwell, Duckworth, and Moran, this committee remains laser-focused on monitoring a safe return to operations at DCA and making sure all users in the airspace are operating responsibly. Let's turn to Newark. Newark International Airport has been beset by delays after the radar system malfunctioned, leaving controllers unable to see or communicate with aircraft in their sector for approximately 90 seconds. What broke down, and how did the system become this deteriorated in the first place?
Thank you, Senator. To answer your question, we were obviously very concerned about the disruptions that occurred in Newark airspace as well for the 90 seconds that it occurred. When we did our investigation, what we found out was our telecommunication provider that provides network lines into that area. There's 2 lines, Senator, that provide data and transmission feeds. The primary line that came in failed. We have a secondary redundant line that provides the radar transmissions and our voice capabilities, and that redundant line is supposed to assume that load. And it's supposed to be instantaneous, where if we were to have a fiber cut of a line or a copper cut of a line, something along those regards, then that redundant line is supposed to kick in. When we lost that first line, the second line did not kick in like it was designed to do. That's what caused the disruption. The disruption was for 90 seconds. The aircraft, I'm an air traffic controller by trade, so I'm just going to talk like an air traffic controller if that's okay. Air traffic controllers provide positive separation between aircraft. That is what we do. And what I mean by that is we never point aircraft head on at the same altitude. We ensure we have appropriate levels of separation. In the event that we have something like a Nordo aircraft that has a stuck mic that could jam up the frequencies, or if we have something like that. So we didn't have a loss of separation based on some of our procedures that we have installed and the techniques that we use as controllers. I do want to highlight that. But 90 seconds is a long time for an air traffic controller. So although we have contingencies in place that we use to make sure that we keep aircraft safe, it is a long disruption for a radar screen to go blank or not to be able to talk to aircraft. So that was something that we wanted to take a look at, and we have put in corrective measures since that happened to ensure that those redundancies are better for that airspace. We have this system across the United States feeding radar data like this, where we have a line and a redundant line, and we haven't had a failure like this to this degree in my memory. So we had to put together, along with the local vendor that was responsible for the telecommunications, to provide a more resistant or a better contingency to ensure that if it ever happened again, that we feel good about those processes. We were able to implement a new contingency, and we are working with a telco provider, along with Secretary Duffy's leadership, to actually bring in a 3rd line of redundancy into that area to prevent this from happening again.
So when the system was down, what was the degree of danger the flying public faced?
The real danger of the flying public would be is if our techniques weren't good, if our controllers didn't put aircraft on positive vectors, if we couldn't quick look or talk to an aircraft via another way, because we have the ability to go via emergency frequencies. We can use PET 2000s that are at our disposal at some of our remote towers. If all those fail at the same time, then we would have to assure that the aircraft follow what they're supposed to do, which is lost comm procedures, where they could go into holding or they could go back to the return frequencies. But if all those start failing all at one time, then all of a sudden the danger that the flying public is then all of a sudden you're going to have to rely on the pilots to do what they do, which is rely on their TCAS systems on board, which is their traffic collision systems.
So I guess what I'm trying to get at is during those 90 seconds, was there a significantly heightened danger to the flying public?
I don't believe there was a heightened significant danger to the flying public. But with that being said, from where I sit, we want to remove all risk to the flying public. And that is what's concerning to me, is how do we remove any bit of that risk? And we need to make sure our contingencies are better placed.